All right, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to tonight's lecture. It is a real pleasure to welcome tonight's speaker, Dr. Francesco Maniglia, who joins us from the Department of Archaeology, Conservation and History at the University of Oslo. He recently completed his PhD in ancient history and was awarded a PhD completion grant to further develop the research undertaken for his dissertation. His dissertation, titled Remolding Cultures, Issues of Continuity and Change in the Italiote Cities of Roman Italy, offers a detailed examination of cultural transformations in the Greek cities of southern Italy following the Roman conquest. Covering the period from the 3rd century BC to the 2nd century CE, Francesco's work draws on a wide range of literary, epigraphic, and archaeological sources to explore how Italiote cities adapted to new political structures and how these shifts influenced local cultural practices. He's currently based at the Norwegian Institute in Athens, where he is spending 3 months as the recipient of the Erstby Archaeology stipend. While in Athens, he has been focusing on inscriptions relating to Italiote individuals and cities located outside the Italian peninsula, broadening both the geographical and interpretive scope of his research. In tonight's lecture, Francesco will present his study of the Sebasta of Neapolis, Pan-Hellenic Games established in Naples under the reign of Augustus. These games reflect not only the cultural ambitions of Neapolis during the early imperial period, but also provide valuable insights into the negotiation of local and imperial identities in the broader Mediterranean world. At the center of his presentation is a fragmentary copy of the games' rules, preserved in Olympia and now housed in the Museum of the Olympic Games of Antiquity. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Francesco Maniglia.
Thank you so much, Pascali, for this lovely introduction. And I want to thank also the Norwegian Institute at Athens for having me not only today, but for the entire research stay. And of course, many thanks to all of you for showing up. And it's so great to see you all. I hope this thing is working. It's not, but okay, this is working. Sorry. Good. So the aim of this lecture is to provide an overview of the Pan-Hellenic Games of Naples, known as the Sebasta, which have been celebrated throughout the imperial period since the Augustan period. We will see the structure and main features, particularly based on the Sebasta regulation preserved in Olympia. We will also address various issues and open questions that continue to challenge modern scholars, offering potential solutions where possible. Finally, I will attempt to contextualize the overall role of the Sebasta within the Neapolitan society during the early empire. Let's start. So, in the 5th book of his geography, Strabo describes the city of Naples in Campania, recounting its origins, history, and notable monuments. Within this description, he mentions the existence of a significant festival that was celebrated in his time. Nowadays, a quinquennial sacred aegon is celebrating among them, the Neapolitans, featuring several days of musical and gymnastic competitions that rival the most important ones in Greece. This celebration was a quinquennial sacred agon, Pentetericossi Rossa Agon, encompassing both athletic and musical contests. According to Strabo, it was so well established that it could be compared to the most important festivals in Greece. Cassius Dio, in book 55, provides additional information reporting the year in which the games were established, 2 BCE. The same year, the temple of Mars Ultor was inaugurated in the Forum of Augustus in Rome. To Augustus himself, a sacred aegon was voted in Neapolis in Campania, nominally because he had restored it when it was devastated by earthquake and fire, but in reality because its inhabitants were the only ones among the neighbors who were somehow zealous for Greek customs. This passage is significant as Dio also states the reason behind the establishment of the festival. This decision was made by the Neapolitans after Augustus assisted the city in recovering from the damage caused by an earthquake. More intriguingly, this motivation appears to be almost a pretext for Cassius Dio, behind which lies the Neapolitans' eagerness to cultivate Greek culture. In fact, during the imperial period, Neapolis was a quite unique case. Its inhabitants were juridically recognized as Roman citizens, and the city itself functioned as a municipium. At the same time, the city strongly displayed Greek practices, notably using Greek as the primary language in epigraphic records. Administrative acts were preserved in Greek, and public municipal offices were translated into Greek. Additionally, the city featured distinctive magistrates, officiants, and associative groups, such as the Demarchos, who held an eponymous role, the Laukelarchoi, whose role remains uncertain, and the Fratris. Literary sources, particularly from the Augustan and Flavian periods, indicate that the Neapolis was a city where Greek customs were preserved and could be practiced freely. Within this hybrid cultural context, the 5-year Games of Neapolis stand out. These games are referred to in Greek literary sources as agon, or specifically Hieros Agon, or Penteterikos Hieros Agon. On the other hand, Latin sources refer to the festival using terms such as Certamen, Certamina, and Certamina Lustri, as well as Neapolitanum Certamen. The complete title of the games is provided solely by the epigraphic data, Italica, Romaia, Sebasta, Isolympia, often abbreviated to Sebasta or Sebasta e Neapolei. The title is significant as it comprises many elements that are somehow difficult to interpret. For Italica, we don't know the connotation that this title implied in the games. Certainly, the term had no small importance if we consider that each edition of the games had the name of Italis, which indicated the 4-year period between celebrations, similar to the Olympias of Olympia. What is certain is that Italica introduces a super-regional dimension that goes beyond the local community, encompassing the entire Italy. The function of Romaia in these games is complex. The Romaia festivals were created in the 2nd century BCE in Greece to celebrate Rome. The earliest known Romaia were held at Chalkis in Euboea, probably instituted in 194, and at Delphi in 189. But they spread quickly throughout the Greek world. The Romaia had never received a systematic study. Till now, the most important work is Ronald Mellor's monograph, Thea Rome, edited in 1977. The Romaia were celebrations connected to the goddess Roma, the deification of the populus Romanus, created to provide the Greeks with a familiar framework for interacting with the Roman state. Mellor, in fact, convincingly considered the cult of Thea Rome as the offspring of the Hellenistic ruler cult, which eventually served as the blueprint for the worship of the Roman emperors. The problem with the Romaia Sebasta of Neapolis is that we have no clue about the function of the Romaia in these games, as there is no evidence concerning the role of the goddess Roma in the festival. Sebasta is the most straightforward term to grasp. It indicates that the games were held in honor of Augustus. Literary sources confirm this, and also archaeological and epigraphic evidence. The term Isolympia is connected with the vast increase in professional athletes in the Hellenistic and Roman period. This caused a proliferation of agonies, many of which were modeled after the most prestigious games in Greece and were referred to as Isolympic or Isopephian. It likely means that the competition shared the same structure and prizes as the Olympic Games. As we have seen, Cassius Dius states that the games were voted in 2 BCE. However, it is certain that the first iteration occurred only 3 years later, in 2 CE. This is the dust from an inscription from Neapolis that shows that the 43rd festival was held in 170 CE. Moreover, Velleius Paterculus, Suetonius, and Dio Cassius report that Augustus attended the festival shortly before he died in 14 CE. since Augustus attended the celebration just before he passed away on the 19th of August, the festival probably began in that month. We know from some of Hadrian's letters found in Alexandria, Troas, that the Sebasta were held, at least in the Hadrian age, between the Capitolia of Rome and the Actia of Nicopolis, and that started on the 23rd of September. Usually this festival lasts 40 days, so the Sebasta presumably ended in September, perhaps coinciding with Augustus' birthday, the 23rd of September. Invaluable information also comes from archaeological research in Naples, especially the excavation in 2003 at the underground station in Piazza Nicolamore, which unearthed the monumental complex where the festival occurred. The Sebasta took place outside the Greek fortification overlooking the coast, in an area occupied from the beginning of the 4th century BCE by not unidentified place of worship, so sorry, and overlaid at the end of the century by two buildings of probable agonistic function. The complex of the Isolympic Games is dated to the Augustan period and consists of a temple, identified with the Caesareum mentioned in an inscription from Olympia, and two porticos. The southern portico, dating to the 2nd century BCE, was remodeled in the Augustan age and thoroughly renovated in the Flavian period. In this period, marble slabs bearing Greek inscriptions replaced the back walls paintings. The slabs list the winners at least 6 editions that took place in the years 74, 78, 82, 86, 90, and 94. Through a detailed study of the marble lists of Piazza Nicolamore, Elena Miranda and her team of colleagues were able to reconstruct and update the cities that took part in the Sebasta. The number of cities amounted to 68 in 2022 and was distributed among Italy, Greece, Epirus, Macedonia, Thrace, Asia Minor, Syria, Cyprus, and Egypt. The table shows that almost all participants came from the polis of the Eastern Mediterranean, while only 3 Western cities were recorded as having won in the Games: Neapolis, Rome, and Panormus. The number of cities which participated is impressive, and at the same time is incomplete, both because the inscriptions are fragmentary and because the marble slabs only contain the ethnic names of the winners and not all the participants. It is clear that even in the 1st century CE, Neapolis was still playing a significant role within the exchange circuit between polis in the Mediterranean. Fortunately, a copy of the Sebasta regulations has been found in Olympia in the 19th century between 8076 and 8080. And modern scholars have partially reconstructed the course of the festival. We don't know the original location of the regulations since their fragments have been discovered in different locations of the sanctuary, near the stadium, the Eco Stoa, and the Temple of Zeus. However, the fact that this document was found in Olympia is quite significant. Russell Geer proposed that the intention behind the inscription was to promote the games to the multitude assembled at the Olympic Games. However, it cannot be excluded that the presence of the document in Olympia could have been bound by the fact that the Eleans could grant the right of organized local Olympic Games upon the payment of a sum, for example. The Isolympic status, which the Sebasta enjoyed, probably required the fulfillment of certain requirements. If that were the case, it cannot be discounted that a copy of the rules was displayed in the sanctuary to guarantee or enhance the validity of the Isolympic status of the Sebasta. Let's see the document. So the first part of the document is lost, unfortunately, and it was supposed to contain the issuing authority of the decree. Lines 4 and 5 preserve the word Syunkletos, which could refer to either the Roman Senate, but also the Neapolitan or the Decurionum. Line 5 mentions the Actia, suggesting that this lost section might have included the date when the Sebasta were held, since we know that it took place right before the Actia of Nicopolis. So the initial fragment contains the eligibility conditions. Competitors were divided into age classes who were provided with an allowance starting 30 days before the festival. From the document, we know that the Sebasta, just like the Olympic Games, had two age classes, Paides and Andres. However, from other inscriptions, we know that the Sebasta also included a third category, the Agenoi. However, since the document from Olympia is very incomplete, it is not clear whether the category of the Agenoi was part of the regulation or was more likely a later addition. Dittenberger, the first editor, restored the lines by assuming that the Sebasta followed the Olympia program and thus had two age groups. Other scholars, like Crowder and Frisch, for example, suggested a restoration that included the category of the Agenoi. The prizes consisted of crowns of width for the Andres and the crowns perhaps of a different material for the remaining categories. The registration probably involved a double procedure in the presence of the Agonothetai at the city gymnasium. Regarding the Agonothetai, we know through the marble list of Piazza Nicolamore that they mostly came from the imperial entourage, and that also some emperors were Agonothetai. Athletes had to present themselves within 30 days of the start of the celebrations and declare their name and age group. If they were late, participants were only admitted if they could provide a valid reason, illness, robbery, or shipwreck. These procedures involved the provision of personal data. The athletes' names had to be registered Hosan Krematisdei e Patroten e Allo Otinium Tropoi. The difficulty in interpreting this line lies in the meaning of Krematisdei. The expression Hos an Krematisdei is a variant of the better known Kaios Krematisdei, used in papyri and to a small extent in inscriptions, concerning personal identification. In this context, Hos Krematisdei generically means according to the official formula, but as stressed by Dittenberger, can also take on the nuance of according to the Roman onomastics. So the lines from this inscription could thus be interpreted in the following ways. Or let the name be registered according to the official formula, either by patronymic or other means according to the law, or the second version, let the name be registered according to the Roman onomastics or by patronymic or in another way according to the law. Next comes a first series of competitions, which were probably divided in those reserved for Neapolitan citizens, the Politai, and those for foreigners, the Xenoi. We know that there were special categories dedicated to the Neapolitans. Female participation was also planned for some competitions, and categories were reserved for the sons and daughters of Neapolitan notables. The athletic program is very fragmentary, but scholars have managed to reconstruct it with the help of other inscriptions, and especially with the marble list of Piazza Nicolamore. The slide that you see is only part, actually, of the entire reconstruction. After the athletic competitions, the program prescribed a procession, a Pompe, to the Caesareum. The highlight of the ceremony was the sacrifice in honor of Caesar Augustus. The theater artists sacrificed an hecatomb. Some animals were offered by whippers, the Zeustarchs, the Agonothetai, and others were at the city's expense. Following the procession, the program mentions a second series of competitions, this time of artistic nature. Unlike athletic competitions, artistic contests received monetary prizes. The inscriptions end, but it is lost, so it doesn't really end, with the mention of other equestrian races. Now, the fundamental problem with these documents relies to its dating. If the inscription records the original regulation of the festival, we should date it to 2 BC. the year that Cassius Dio claimed the Sebasta were voted. Dittenberger did not give a precise date for the document, but rather emphasized how the Sebasta diverged from the Isolympic Games. Isolympic status meant the competition followed the rules of the Olympic Games and distributed the same prizes. However, the Sebasta of Neapolis followed the rules of Olympia only partially, as the latter included athletic competitions but never artistic performances. These uncertainties, combined with the fact that the Olympian inscription presents the athletic and artistic competitions separated by the procession, led Dittenberger to speculate on the existence of a previous festival called Italica Isolympia that only featured athletic competitions in conformity with the Olympic Games. This festival would have been later combined with a new one, Romaia Sebasta, starting with a procession to honor Augustus and followed by musical performances. Indeed, the combination of the Romaia with the local games is not uncommon in Greece. As Mellor has pointed out, at some stage, the Romaia began to be joined to local festivals, such as the Pythaia Kairomaia at Megara, the Poseidaia Kairomaia at Mantidea, and the Dia Kaianteia Kairomaia at Opus in Locris. Especially in the 1st century BCE, the Romans were actively involved in the institution of joint celebrations involving Romaia. This is especially evident in Boeotia, where following the Mithridatic War, Sulla restored the local agonistic program by linking it to Rome. Examples are the Erotidea Kairomaia in Thespie and Amphiraia Kairomaia in Oropus. Geer agreed with Dittenberger and pointed out that sacrifices to Augustus would have been more appropriate after his death, which seems to align with Cassius Dio, who states that the worship of Augustus while he was alive was allowed in the provinces but never practiced in Italy. Geer dated the change in the program at the edition of the 18th CE, based on the testimony of Strabo, who included musical competitions in his description of the games. On the other hand, Georg Vissova paleographically dated the description to the late 1st century CE, and by looking at other inscriptions related to the Sebasta, ruled out the possibility that athletic and artistic competitions were separated by a procession. Vissova considered some fragments of the Sebasta list of winners in which the equestrian competitions were named after the musical contests. According to Vissova, all the competitions began after the procession. He suggested that the first part of the description from Olympia concerned just general rules for the games, with the second one presenting the detailed program starting with the Pompeii, followed by the musical contests first, then the equestrian ones, and finally the athletic ones. Unfortunately, the date of the inscription is still uncertain, and it is not clear whether it constitutes a copy of the earliest program or a later version. However, Dittenberger's suggestion that the document pointed out two types of events, athletic and artistic, separated by a procession, seems to be rejected by recent epigraphic discoveries. In fact, the reconstruction of the winners list from Piazza Nicolamore shows a succession of artistic categories at the beginning, followed by the equestrian ones, and finally the athletic ones. As things stand, Vissova's hypothesis seems the most convincing. A second unclear aspect of the program from Olympia concerns the ceremony in honor of Augustus, which Geer suggested must be assigned to a time period following his death. Elena Miranda has addressed the issues many times, convincingly suggesting that the Sebasta envisaged worshipping Augustus while the emperor was still alive. In the program, the sacrifice is prescribed in honor of Sebastos, Caesar, whereas the cult of the deceased emperor included the title of Theos, that is not included in the Sebasta program in Olympia. Further, Miranda has pointed out some evidence indicated the presence of priests of Augustus in southern Italy when he was still alive. In Neapolis, a funerary inscription mentions the existence of a Hiereus Sebastu Caesaros, where the name of Augustus is not preceded, again, by the title of Theos. According to Miranda, the sacrifices for Augustus during the Sebasta were probably connected to the Dies Natalis of the emperor, the 23rd of September, as the festival was probably celebrated until the last days of that month. Although its exact dating remains uncertain, the program from Olympia is of vital importance for the comprehension of the Sebasta. Indeed, numerous indications suggest that Neapolis was well integrated within the relationships between polis during the imperial time. Not only did the Sebasta's program and competitive categories mirror the other Panhellenic Games, moreover, it is surprisingly striking that the allowance and the monetary prizes consisted of drachmas. It is not known whether the rules of the Olympic Games provided an allowance for the athletes, but it is certain that its prizes did not include any money. That means that the monetary awards Neapolis gave out were not bound to this Olympic status of the Sebasta, especially since they were reserved for winners in the artistic categories, not included in the Olympic Games. However, in the imperial period, or actually also in the Republican period, the currency circulating in Neapolis was not the drachma, was the denarius, which the Neapolitans had used for about 3 centuries. This implied that the city had to provide their own supplies of drachmas to sustain the rewards and rewards the participants. Now, why doing that? So this decision might have been might have favored probably the participants who came predominantly from Asia. However, the circulation of Roman currency in Asia is attested as early as the mid-1st century BCE, drastically increasing in presence throughout the 1st century CE. More likely, the Neapolitans may have wanted to follow the model of the Greek games closely, both in terms of competitions and prizes. In this sense, the Neapolitan use of drachma, albeit the city adopted Roman currency for many centuries, could be understood as motivated by reasons of representation. This would be in line with the literary image of Neapolis, according to which the city was still keeping Greek culture alive. Another aspect worth emphasizing is the importance that the Neapolitans placed on local custom and civic pride in organizing the Sebasta. We saw earlier how the fragments of the program indicated some divisions between citizens and foreigners. Some competitions were reserved for citizens, while others were even limited to the sons and daughters of the Neapolitan decuriones. Gier argued that the restricted competition safeguarded the safeguarded the citizens, many of whom in normal categories would not have stood a chance against international athletes. Nevertheless, Gier pointed out that reserved categories in a Panhellenic event, which drew participants from all over the Greek world, was rather unusual. Indeed, the Sebasta not only had a great international scope, but often saw the direct participation of the emperor, not only as honorary spectator, but also as agonothetes, and in some cases as participants. Moreover, the procession and sacrifices for Augustus may have also included a local component. The religious section of the Sebasta is particularly problematic, as it is uncertain whether the festival was born ex novo or constituted a combined celebration that continued an older one, as Dittenberger pointed out. In his study on the worship of the goddess Roma, Mellor stated that it is difficult to determine the nature of the Romaia festival. In some cases, the Romaia were initially added to local festivals, but later, in the imperial age, and that is the case, they were renamed or completely reinvented to honor the emperor. Mellor expressed doubts about the Sebasta of Neapolis in particular, which did not appear to be a celebration in honor of the goddess Roma, but intended to honor Augustus alone. He therefore suggested that the terms Romaia was nothing more than an honorary epithet. On the contrary, we have seen how Dittenberger has stressed the existence of a previous festival, the Italica, that eventually merged with Romaia. Georg Kaibel has connected the Sebasta to earlier games in honor of Aphrodite, based on his interpretation of an inscription dedicated to Asseleucus, arcontaton diapente et on timeticon Aphrodites. However, this interpretation has been rejected by modern scholars who rather interpreted arcontaton diapente et on timeticon as a magistrate with censor duties. Hans Philipp has argued an intermediate position, agreeing with Kaibel, but considered the festival in honor of Augustus and Aphrodite to be an extension of the older festival of Parthenope. Julius Belloc rejected a correlation between Timeticon and Aphrodites of our inscription and argued that the Sebasta had absorbed the ancient lampas, the torch race, in honor of the siren Parthenope. The torch race for Parthenope is mentioned by Lycophron in the Alexandra and clarified by Tzetzes, who links the information to Timaeus. Strabo, likely following the same source, talks about agonistic celebration in honor of the siren connected to her monument. More recently, Elena Miranda has stressed the link between the siren and the imperial games based on the Neapolitan marble list mentioning a Sebastulan pass. Miranda suggested that the program of the Sebasta may have reflected an ideological choice by Augustus, who tried to replace the siren, taking on all the prerogatives that once belonged to Parthenope. So in this way, being the founder, the ctistes of the city, and the holder of the main games, and also of the prestigious torch race. Against the idea of a combined festival that absorbed the siren's agon, lies the silence of the sources that never mentioned a relationship between Parthenope and the Sebasta. Strabo even mentioned the two festivals separately in two different sections in his description of Neapolis. At the same time, Miranda's assumption of a cultural and ideological substitution of Augustus for Parthenope is not solid enough. As Mellor has rightly stressed, torch racing was a fairly common competition at the Romaia. Moreover, torch races were not exclusively associated with Parthenope in Neapolis. For example, Statius also mentioned a torch race performed to honor Ceres. Miranda's suggestion that Augustus wanted to appear as a new founder of Neapolis is quite intriguing. However, if this were the case, I find it difficult to believe that he intended to suppress or downsize the cult of the siren, which appears to be so dear to the Neapolitan local pest. At present, I am more keen on the idea of two separate agonists coexisting. However, it remains uncertain whether the Sebasta were initially local games later combined with the celebration for Augustus, as Dittenberger argued, or if the festival was instituted ex novo. Archaeological research has established the existence of 2nd century BCE material in the levels below the Augustan temple, with decorative elements suggesting a temple function. A clue in this direction is suggested by the Sebasta regulation, which mention, the gods of the polis. So during the day to make a procession towards the Caesareum and the other gods of the cities as customary. So the interpretation of these lines poses a few difficulties because of their many gaps, as you can see. At the end of the procession and right before the sacrifices for Augustus, the city apparently paid some homage to the city gods and primarily to a deity or more deities whose names has been lost. So there is one god and the other gods of the polis. So the procession had to start somewhere in the city and terminate at the Caesareum. There, the Neapolitans might have started the religious ceremony by making offerings to the city gods. The precedence given to the gods over Augustus, the festival dedicatee, may be attributed to the fact that the emperor was still alive when the Neapolitans established the games. So Augustus still lacked the title of Theos, and consequently it was natural to give precedence to the gods, to the city gods. If Dittenberger's assumption of an earlier festival was correct, it is attractive to believe that some Neapolitan Poliadic gods were its primary recipients. In any case, what is most striking about these lines is the expression catatos unetes, as it customary, which may refer to the type of sacrifice to be made. A parallel might be found in a passage from Antoninus Liberalis' Metamorphoses, where it is told that a certain Clinis, who in Babylon wanted to honor Apollo in the manner of the Hyperboreans by sacrificing donkeys. Apollo appeared and threatened him with death if he did not cease this sacrifice and offer, as was customary, catatos unetes, goats, sheep, and oxen. So the sense of tradition expressed by the formula catatos unetes in the regulation indicates that the cult of Poliadic deities might have been active for some time, as the manner of its performance was considered customary. The mention of the alloi theoites poleos prompts questions as to the identity of those deities, also considering that one or more of them was given primacy. The peculiarity of Neapolis is that the city worshipped some local deities known as theoi patroi. One of these gods, Eumelis, hero god actually, is mentioned in a Neapolitan inscription. Precious information is provided by Statius, who revealed that the Patri, the Latin translation of theoi patroi, are the gods of the Euboean, are the gods that the Euboean carried out with them when they sailed towards the Gulf of Naples. They were Apollo, the hero Eumelis, Demeter, and the Dioscuri. One should wonder whether the theoites poleos and the theoi patroi are synonyms. If that is the case, then we could imagine integrating the program of Olympia with one of these deities, for example, Apollon kai alloi theoites poleos. Apollo, in fact, is the first god to be mentioned by Statius. He was named as Ductor Populi, and the main gods of the Cumeans. Moreover, elsewhere in the poem, Statius stated that Patrius Apollo promised his laurels to the children of Julius Menecrates, the recipient of the poem, thus connecting both the aspect of protector of the city and patron of arts. A connection between the theoites poleos and theoi patroi is perhaps suggested by two inscriptions found in Naples. The first is a dedicatory inscription of the Temple of the Dioscuri, now Basilica of San Paolo Maggiore, of the 1st century CE. As Miranda has argued, the cult of the polis was not uncommon during the Hellenistic and imperial periods, and dedications related to the polis associated with other deities are known. However, if the Neapolitans decided to associate the polis with the Dioscuri, it was likely due to their strong identity as patrons of Neapolis. And if to their Poliadic aspect we add a connection with the agonistic world, especially with the Sebasta, then their identification with the theoites poleos strengthens in its appeal. A marble base dated 170-171 bears the dedication for two individuals, Titus Flavius Euanthes and his brother Zosimus, commemorating their victory at the Sebasta. Euanthes won in the Diaulos in the category of Paides Politikoi, the city boys, while Zosimus won in the category reserved for the Tagma, probably the Ordo Decurionum. The brothers were members of the Fratres of the Eumelides, which celebrated their victory by dedicating statues of the Dioscuri. The dedication is reinforced by the inscription on the right side of the base, in which the winner's parents, Titus Flavius Zosimus and Flavia Fortunata, donated to the Dioscuri lamps and altars. Miranda has already emphasized how honors to the Dioscuri by this family were motivated not so much by the traditional cults of the fratry, but by the relationship between these deities and the agonies. Certainly, the choice to honor the Dioscuri must lie in the fact that the dedicatees were also brothers, just like the gods. This recalls also the aforementioned poem of Statius, in which he associated Menecate's children, 2 boys and 1 girl, with Helen and the Dioscuri, to whom Patrius Apollo promised his laurels. Unfortunately, the evidence is not solid enough to support the exact equivalence between Theoites Poleos and Theoi Patroi. However, whether or not there was an earlier festival dedicated to the city deities, the latter still played a role in the religious ceremonies of the Sebasta. It is then pretty clear that the Neapolitans used the Sebasta to enhance their civic pride, and just as the competitive section of the games included a designated area for local citizens, the sacred part had a space for local deities. I'm about to conclude, don't worry. So the Sebasta constitute what I called a liminal space in which the Neapolitans, on the one hand, could display multicultural features in order to interface with an international audience and deal with the imperial central power. On the other hand, the Sebasta enabled the city to assert its agency and maintain its cultural heritage, albeit with new forms and meanings. The decision to establish the Sebasta was linked to the Neapolitans' desire to align with Augustus' imperial policy. As Cassius Dio stated, Augustus restored the city after it had been deeply affected by an earthquake. Neapolis seized this opportunity to strengthen its bonds with imperial power, doing so through traditional Greek practices. That the imperial power had a lot of weight in the organization of the Sebasta is clear, both from the regulation and from the marble lists of Piazza Nicola More, which indicated that the Agonothetai and other offices mostly belonged to the imperial entourage. Polis frequently expressed their consent for Roman policy through the creation of agonistic festivals. Neapolis' connection with the polis of the Mediterranean reinforced the city's position, especially because it adopted the celebratory model of Duromaia, taking on a festival typical of the cities of mainland Greece and especially Asia Minor. This allowed Neapolis to strengthen its ties with the Eastern polis while also reasserting its cultural autonomy and creating a space for negotiation and communication with the central Roman state. Interestingly, the name chosen for the festival was Italica, with Italis being the name for the game's editions. By selecting a national ethnic name rather than a city one for the festival, the Neapolitans expanded their local boundaries and tightened the link between their city and the Augustan propaganda of Tota Italia. At the same time, the Sebasta stressed the primacy of the Neapolitans, who were the holders of the only Romaia taking place in Italy and in a place very close to Rome, the heart of the empire. The liminal space of the Sebasta facilitated the encounters between different cultural elements and allowed the Neapolitans to maintain a connection with their local traditions. We have seen how the festival involved a strong civic element, including categories reserved for citizens and spaces dedicated to local religious celebration. This hybrid cultural setting enabled Neapolis to preserve aspects of its local past, although in different forms, while also embracing new cultural features and practices, meeting Rome's political and social expectations. Thank you.
Francesco, for this very interesting lecture for a set of games which apparently have more than the eye can see when it comes to identity, negotiated identities in southern Italy during this period. So, any questions?
Thank you. That was very educating. I'm sorry, it gave you a lot of headaches to make sense of all these things. I want to ask you a little bit about. I mean, I like what you said about maybe it's and others, of course, two different festivals or organizations coming together That is because the torch race is a thing we find primarily in very local festivals or in festival associated with a gymnasium, place associated with training. Because the torch races, you need teams. And because torch races is not part of the competition, like for athletic competitions everywhere. I mean, they're nowhere actually, only in local festivals. The only thing that, to me at least, I don't know if you disagree, makes sense for torch races is to be a competition among local citizens. So this might give you I don't know if that might give you an idea of something very local, as opposed to something super local, let's say, which is the other games. But I think it's very interesting because to me it feels as if the Neapolitans wanted to address very different audiences. They want to address their own city, they want to address the Romans, they want to address the Greeks, they want to address social class. And this is, I think, very unique, isn't it? I don't think it happens anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can see, yes, but we also have to say that I think that the Sebasta are one of the best known festivals, thanks to the discoveries of Piazza Nicola More. And of course, I think we are so lucky. I don't know how many other regulations of agonistic festival we have. Probably no, or very few. Yeah, probably some Hellenistic festivals. So. It is true that we also have information on local components of this festival because of the many evidence that we have. But that's true. I think that it is a unique case, and it is also connected to the willingness of Neapolis to strengthen its ties with its Greek past. But the torch race question, I think it's a very thorny question. As you said, the torch races are possess a very local component, and this is, I mean, aside from the torch race at the Sebasta, this is true because sources talk about the torch race in honor of Parthenope. Statius also mentions a torch race in honor of Ceres, but not a normal Ceres. Ceres among the Dei Patri, so the Polyadic gods. And then we have the lampas for Augustus. But the point is that, at least as Mellors stated, the lampas, it's actually it is a quite common feature at the Romaia. So it doesn't mean that the lampas for Augustus or the lampas at the Sebasta was somehow connected to the lampas for Parthenope. There might have been two different torch races. We don't know, and we also have the problem because the sources also try to tie Neapolis with Athens. The torch race for Parthenope was made according to Lycophron and Tzetzes and Timaeus by Diotimus, who was an Athenian commander, so ties with Athens. And the torch race in the Athenians Panhellenic Games was also a common feature. So there is also this component. So I think that we don't have enough evidence to say that since there is a lampas in the Sebasta Games, it had to be related to the Parthenope or some previous festivals. I mean, what I am certain is that local games were included in the Sebasta Games, so and displayed throughout an international audience. That's the point I find much more interesting. So all the international audience was somehow forced to assist to the ceremonies for local days. So these local deities were actually displayed internationally. And so there was some effort, and I find much more curious the currency. So they use drachmas. I think this is so strange. I never find, also because for a few inscriptions that I saw about agonistic festivals in the Roman imperial period in Asia Minor, they named denarius. They used the denarius with no problems at all. So why using the drachmas in Naples if they
also probably they award citizenship to victorious athletes.
Pardon?
Probably also award Neapolitan citizenship, as Greek cities would do,
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
That's also a very Greek thing to do.
Exactly. I mean, we know that we know they did actually. We know of many many athletes that received Neapolitan citizens. We know also of many emperors, especially the Flavian ones, who actually earned some honorary magistrates, also the highest. But yeah, the problem is that I'm not sure if there was a combined fest. For sure there was. For sure the Isolympic sanctuary was on how can I say, abortive context, even earlier, even before the Augustan period. But the exact relationships between previous festivals and the Sebasta is not known. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. I have two quick questions. One, you mentioned when you were discussing about the different crowns for the pedes, for the andres and the agones. So do all two categories or three categories get their own different crowns? And what would it's a epigraphic record or source saying that? Is there like one with a different shape, one with a different material? And my second question was similar. In that we talked about the structure. I said an athletic start after the procession, an athletic artistic games, and then the equestrian games, and then the athletic games.
Equestrian races.
Yes.
In description.
Yes. Is this also following a sort of social order of the city?
Pardon?
Is it following a social order, like how a city was founded? Anything?
Based on who was destined to participate in these different
social
stages
hierarchy
of the games, if this corresponds to some kind of social hierarchy.
Ah, okay. Yeah. I'll try to remember the questions because I'm very forgetful. So the first one concerned the crowns. I mentioned two types of crowns. We don't know if there were two types of crowns because the maybe I can see. Is this part? No.
Yeah.
There it is.
It's
Yes, exactly. So it is lost. So we don't know. We know that the Andres received crowns of red, but we don't know the other crowns. Many iconographical features on the Sebasta inscriptions display the crowns of red, but we don't know. The second question, similar answer. I have no idea. Unfortunately, I don't know if they follow that social hierarchy. I don't think so. I don't think that it was something grounded on social basis. The following of the competitions. Yes.
Thanks, Francesco. It was really interesting. Just out of curiosity, you quoted Cassius Dion about the foundation of the games dating back to 7th century BC. But the actual...
No, sorry, 2 BC.
2 BC. Yes, sorry.
No.
Of course. But the actual first celebration was 4 years after.
In 2
so,
CE, yes.
Is it typical to have like this lack of coincidence between the year of foundation and the first year of celebration in Pan-Hellenic games? And because the game is Pentateuchos, so it is strange that the first celebration took actually place 5 years in the 5th year after the foundation of the game. So do you find this pattern often in?
I mean, honestly, I haven't studied other festivals. So the Sebasta are the only festivals that I studied because they were related to my thesis, who were concerned to other things, so not festivals. I would love to explore festivals, especially in the imperial period, but I will need a job first. I don't think that we have so many festivals. I don't think if we have actually a festival at all in which we know the first time in which a festival was voted and the first time the festival was established. What I can tell you is that if I can see the passage from Cassius Dio, is that he used epsepiste. So he just saying that, if I'm correct, that the games were voted. So something like the citizen were just gathered together, probably the boule, probably the synchros that is mentioned in descriptions, and they just decided, they just voted for the establishment of the games. And then, of course, it took some years to prepare all the games and also the first edition. So there were some. So I think that Cassius Dio is just mentioning the year in which it was voted by the people and not the first edition of the game. So and it was natural that since the time it was voted and the first time it had some years. So I don't know if they respected some kind of specific time between the two decisions, but that's what I can say. That actually.
Yes, but probably the complex of the Isolympic Games at the Piazza Nicolamore was in progress.
Exactly. Yes.
Because we have a very important complex with the temple and porticus and square. So probably it was in progress.
And also because that place it is dated to the Augustan period. So actually in this exact period. So I think that they also had need time to organize the whole thing since. I mean, so we gather, we vote, and then we need to do the job, and it's it requires some time. But it's. I think it's that's just really interesting. We have so many information. So we have the year in which it was voted, the year in which was established. So,
if I may, I mean, you define the Sebasta as a liminal space.
Yes.
Although they seem way more open to contention and reading than a liminal space, more like a hybrid space in this sense. Open in terms, what people can see in them in terms of identity, promoting the different or the multi-layered identity. So it seems to be more open than liminal.
Yes. No. I mean, I actually the word liminal is took from. A post-colonial model that is called hybridity. Actually, it's from Omi Babas.
I know, but this is the third space of emancipation.
Yes, exactly. So liminal space, in a sense that it's something like a space an in-between space. That was I meant. So say, of course, it's something. It's something more open, but it's something that
I got it.
I want to emphasize that.
I realized you used the Homi Baba.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me like a proper example of the face of emancipation. So, yeah, it is liminal. But
yeah, so it was actually the theoretical framework that I used for my thesis.
Can I squeeze in a very quick question?
Yes.
Is that inscription, the 56, is that a degree? Do we know? Can we tell?
We don't know. I can show you.
And you said it's dated probably into BCE.
We don't know. This you meaning the decree from Olympia? Could be. I mean, the issuing part is lost. We have some ambassadors named, and we have the syncletos. Could be if it's a degree, maybe it's a degree amended by the Ordo Decurionum of Naples. In which the ambassador, so yeah, maybe the ambassador were writing, the Olympia is writing, the ambassador came and they took this degree, they established this, and then they had the regulations of the Sebasta, for example. I don't know, I'm just suggesting.
I wanted to see if there is any chance that this might be have any sort of reference to the degree that Cassius mentioned.
I mean, it could be. I think it is, but I don't have it. I can prove it. But
I didn't know if it was a degree. That's why I asked.
Yes, I mean, it could be. I mean, now that I'm thinking about, for example, at the Asclepieion of Kos in the Asylia, we have on the inscriptions of all the cities that accepted the Asylia, and we have also an inscription related to Naples. And they said, the Theodikoia has been sent. they came back with the decree of the Neapolitans, and the Neapolitans decided that, and then there is the decree. So it could be something similar. I mean,
since we have no other questions, thank you, Francesco. Very
and
much.
thank you.